Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Buckeye Politics. So, it's been a couple of weeks since we made a presidential prediction, and a lot has happened. There was another assassination attempt of President Trump. We had a debate a few weeks back. The 2024 election is moving along at a very quick pace. A lot is happening very quickly, and we still have about 40 days or so to go. We have a lot of data starting to come out now, different polls from different states. And with that, I thought it was time to make a new presidential election prediction between Kamala Harris and Donald Trump. So let's get right into it by filling out the safe states for each candidate. Kamala's safe states include pretty much the entire West Coast, Colorado, Hawaii, pretty much the entire eastern seaboard, all the Democratic states that you would expect, although New York might be a little bit closer than expected, Illinois, and Maine at large, and Maine's first. Actually, Maine at large might be likely. We'll get rid of that for now. But that's going to be Kamala Harris's safe states. Trump's safe states pretty much include all the states you would also expect: Deep South up to Appalachia, parts of the Mountain West. I think we'll include Nebraska at large here. And I believe that is it. So the remaining states here, the 225 electoral votes still on the board, are going to be the states that are going to be a little bit more competitive. We'll look at some polls here. And with that, we'll start with the likely states between Trump and Kamala. Kamala Harris's likely states include the states of New Mexico, Virginia, Minnesota, and Maine at large. In the state of New Mexico, we'll look at polling here very quickly. Let's see on RCP. We'll go to the electoral map. Come down here to New Mexico. Kamala Harris is about an 11-point lead on RCP. There was a poll that came out about last week that had her up by 10. Trump is probably going to do a little bit better with Hispanics this election cycle than he did in 2020, and he already made improvements with Hispanics in 2020. I think he probably gets it barely under 10, and Republicans in the Senate race also have a pretty strong candidate. Maybe that helps down ballot a little bit. Maybe helps Trump with some suburbanites. So I think that Trump probably loses New Mexico by 8 to 9 points. In the state of Virginia, this is a very interesting state, actually. It's a state that Republicans thought they had no chance in for the future. Glenn Youngkin won. He kind of turned that around. Right now, it's polling closer than a lot of people expect. Some polls, like this poll from the Washington Post, has Kamala Harris up by 8, but there's other polls like that have Kamala Harris up by just 2, up by just 3. New York Times, which is a pretty accurate pollster, although it is a slightly more, I guess, has a slight liberal bias, does have Kamala Harris up by just 5, which is half of what Joe Biden won Virginia by in 2020. So there are a lot of people on the right that think Trump has a chance to flip Virginia. I personally don't think so. I think he probably loses it by 5 to 6 points, which is an improvement from 2020 against Biden, but still, I just don't think he really has a chance there. Up in Minnesota, once again, just like Virginia, we've seen some kind of mixed polling. As you can see here, Kamala Harris leads in the aggregate by about 5 points. Pretty much every one of the last few polls has Kamala Harris up by about 5. I think that's pretty accurate. She probably wins the state by 5 to 6 points. Tim Walz, if anything, is probably going to hurt her in rural Minnesota, but help her a lot in the Minneapolis suburbs if she had any problems with progressives there like Biden did. And I also think that just Democrats switching out Biden for Kamala helps them out a bunch in a state like Minnesota. Minnesota has a large population of very progressive voters, as well as Muslim voters who were not going to vote for Biden because of the war in Gaza. And I'm sure many of them are going to sit out this election as well, maybe vote for someone like Jill Stein or Cornel West. But still, switching out Biden for Kamala is going to help energize those voters a little bit more. And so because of that, I think Kamala probably wins Minnesota by about 5 to 6. So the likely Republican states include the states of Iowa, Texas, Ohio, Florida, and Maine's 2nd Congressional District, along with the great state of Alaska. So we'll start in Alaska. This is a state that I don't think is going to be all that competitive. I think this is just simply more of a margin issue. We don't really have any polling out of Alaska on RCP. There was a poll that I saw that had Trump up by about 5, another poll that had him up by 10. I think it's probably a mix between that. Trump probably wins the state by 7 to 8. Trump won Alaska by 10 in 2020. He won it by about 15 in 2016. I think that Trump probably loses a little bit of ground in the Anchorage area. The suburbs there turned against him heavily in 2020. I think you see something similar to that in 2024, but probably not to the extent that we saw in 2020. I think Alaska is going to be just like, not not Virginia, maybe like New Mexico. It's not going to be all that close, like margin wise, but it's just barely going to be under 10 points. Trump probably wins it by like 8 to 9, probably closer to 9. The state of Texas, we do have some polls out of Texas, so we'll go take a look at those real quickly. Trump leads the aggregate by about 5. I think that's pretty accurate. I think Trump is probably going to lose a little bit of ground in the DFW area, Dallas-Fort Worth. Just like he did in 2020, the suburbanites there are not big fans of him. But I think he makes up that. I don't think he loses as much ground there as people think. I think Kamala is kind of a poor fit for those voters. I think Trump also does pretty well in the Rio Grande Valley and maybe even the Houston suburbs. Those are areas that I just think Kamala Harris is a very poor fit for Texas as a candidate. Joe Biden had some of that more moderate appeal. You could even maybe argue he was an older guy. He didn't really run on a whole lot of progressive issues. There really wasn't a whole lot to attack him on from that side of the aisle. While Kamala, there is stuff to attack her on in terms of her progressive stances, and I think that's going to hurt her in Texas. I think the border as well. I think that the border in general is going to energize Republican turnout and hurt Democrats, but I think especially because Kamala is the supposed border czar, I think that's going to hurt her as well. So all those factors, I think Trump does a little bit better in Texas than he did in 2020, but probably not by much. He probably wins it by 6 to 7 points. The state of Iowa, not a whole lot to say here. You could probably argue Iowa is safe, to be honest. Trump won it by 8 in 2020. He won it by 10 in 2016. I think that it's probably just barely under 10, probably 9 points. And same thing with Ohio. I think Trump wins Ohio by 9 to 10 points. I'm putting them in the likely column just for now, just kind of for, I guess, because I still want to see a little bit of more data. But I would not be surprised if Iowa and Ohio both vote for Trump by over 10. Kamala Harris, once again, very poor fit for Iowa and Ohio. They're very white, very rural, very working class states. In Ohio, you could make the argument she might do a little bit better with, like, some people in like Delaware County and Franklin County, like the Columbus suburbs that are growing, becoming a little bit more liberal. Maybe she does a little bit better with those voters, helps energize them. But I think she does much worse than Biden in the Mahoning Valley and rural Ohio. Florida, once again, Florida is trending to the right at just such a massive amount. I mean, it voted for Trump narrowly in 2020, it voted for Trump narrowly in 2016, voted for Ron DeSantis very narrowly in 2018. And then in 2022, Ron DeSantis wins by like 19 points. Marco Rubio wins by like 17 points. And right now, polling has this race in Florida relatively competitive. Trump is still leading by like 5, 7, even 10 points. He leads the aggregate by about 6. I think he does much better than that. I think there's going to be a pretty strong surge of Republican turnout in Florida. I think because it is a general election and not a midterm, Trump is going to do worse than DeSantis did. But he still, I think, wins the state by like 8, 9, 10 points. And honestly, with Iowa, Ohio, and Florida, I could easily see these states voting for Trump by more than 10. It's just right now, I think the margin is not quite there yet. Maine's 2nd District. This is a very rural part of Maine up in the northern part of the state. I don't know if we can. Here we go. Maine 2nd District. There was a poll that had Kamala leading here, but I don't trust that at all. Polling had Biden doing very well here in 2020, and he lost it handily. There was another poll in Maine that tends to be more accurate that has Trump up by 7 there. Just to be safe, I'm keeping it as likely Republican and likely for Trump, I think. But I would not be surprised at all if Trump wins Maine 2nd District by more than 10. Like I said, this is a very rural, very conservative, very working class part of the state. It did vote for Obama twice. These are voters that are actually probably more similar to voters in like Michigan and Wisconsin than the rest of the Northeast. But still, just because Kamala did poll fairly well there, and I'm a little bit skeptical of polling, and I don't want to be too generous to Republicans after what happened in 2022. I'm going to leave this as likely R. So the remaining states here, the 98 electoral votes, are what's really going to decide this election. And we'll start by going east to west. We'll start in New Hampshire. That's going to lean to Kamala Harris. New Hampshire is a state that is very different than it was even just a couple of cycles ago. New Hampshire has this kind of reputation of being a much more, I guess, libertarian, free market kind of state, but it tends to vote they have a Republican governor, they have a Republican state legislature, but they vote for Democrats on the national level because they're socially liberal but more economically conservative. That's kind of changing. A lot of voters from Massachusetts are moving into New Hampshire. College-educated voters who make up a large population in New Hampshire are shifting left, and not just in New Hampshire, in the country as a whole, but it just is affecting New Hampshire quite a bit. I think Trump does a little bit, probably does about as well as he did in New Hampshire in 2020, because he did campaign there a lot in the primaries, and because of that, I think maybe he gets a small boost. I also, once again, think Kamala Harris is not a great fit for the state, although she probably would do a little bit better than Biden. I think the polling aggregate has Kamala Harris up by 7. I think it's probably a little bit closer to 5, but I do think Kamala wins it relatively handily. The state of Pennsylvania, this is an interesting one. So currently in the RCP aggregate, Kamala Harris leads in Pennsylvania by 0.6. But as you can see here in the Pennsylvania at this day in history, in 2016, Clinton led by almost 6 points. She lost the state. Biden led by about 4 points. He won the state by about a point. So polling in Pennsylvania typically overestimates Democrats, especially at this point in time, usually by a couple of points. Assuming there's a polling miss the size of 2020, 2016, Trump would win the state relatively handily. If there is a polling miss half the size of the 2020 miss, Donald Trump would win the state of Pennsylvania very narrowly. The Trump campaign is putting a lot of resources into Pennsylvania. They see it as a must-win state, and I agree with that. And because of that, they have been campaigning very hard. They have boots on the ground. There is some data from the Kamala Harris campaign we've seen that's been leaked that has them very nervous about Pennsylvania. Like I said, Republicans are going all in on the state. Polling has the state neck and neck, and it usually overestimates Democrats. Trump usually outperforms because there are a lot of low propensity white working class voters in Western Pennsylvania. These are people who probably did not turn out in 2022 or 2018, but they are very loyal to Trump. I do think Trump narrowly picks off the state. I think he does make improvements with white working class voters, even in northeastern Pennsylvania, like the Scranton area. Biden was a uniquely strong fit for the Scranton area. I think Kamala Harris loses ground there. I think that Kamala probably, the only thing that really helps her, she probably makes gains in the Philadelphia suburbs because Trump is just not liked in that part of the state. But I think that it's not going to be a big enough shift, along with Trump doing better in pretty much all the rural areas. Inner city Philadelphia, we've seen Trump poll very well in the actual city of Philly compared to 2020, and I think he makes big gains in the Scranton area. North Carolina, this is another state that Democrats are pretty bullish on. Trump leads in the aggregate by 0.5, but there have been some quality pollsters that have Kamala Harris leading in the state. I think it's going to lean to Trump. He probably wins it by about 1 point, maybe 1.5. Polling in North Carolina is usually relatively accurate, although it has underestimated Republicans by about 2 points in both 2016. In 2016, Trump led the aggregate by about 1. He won it by about 3. In 2020, Biden led the aggregate in North Carolina by about 1. He lost it by about 1.5. So, assuming a similar polling miss, Trump wins the state by about 1.5 to 2. I think that, like I said, Kamala is not a strong candidate, but she is going to do much better than Biden would. And Trump is putting a lot of effort into North Carolina. And I think because of that, he wins the state narrowly. I think he makes a lot of gains in sort of the northeastern part of the state near the border with Virginia. This is a very rural but has a heavy black population. I think those voters continue to shift to the right. I think Trump does a little bit better in like the Wilmington suburbs and like the central part of the state. I think Kamala does, like I said, better in the Raleigh and Charlotte suburbs, but it just kind of evens out, and he wins it, and Trump wins it by the same margin he did in 2020. Georgia, same thing, lean Republican. Trump has actually been polling very well in the state of Georgia recently. He leads the aggregate by about 2 points. And Kamala Harris has kind of fallen apart in terms of her polling average after they were kind of neck and neck, and then Kamala Harris has fallen down quite a bit. The Trump campaign is putting a lot of money into Georgia, and some quality pollsters like the New York Times have Trump up by 4. Atlanta Constitution Journal has Trump up by 3. Quinnipiac has Trump up by 3. So because of all those things considered, I think Trump wins Georgia by about 3 points. I think African-American turnout is going to be much lower than it was in 2020. And we've already seen that in the state of Georgia in the early vote returns. White turnout is up by about 3 points. Black turnout is down by about 3 points. Obviously, Kamala is going to still do well in the Atlanta suburbs. But is it going to be well enough? Probably not, especially when Trump is really energizing voters in the rural parts of the state. And I actually think, if anything, the suburbs might be pretty much stagnant just because I think Kamala is, like I said, a very poor fit for the suburbs of Georgia, which tend to be more traditionally conservative. They just don't really like Trump. I think she still does well there, but not well enough. I think Trump wins the state of Georgia by about 2. We're going to go up to Michigan. I think Kamala Harris narrowly wins Michigan. We'll put it in the tilt Democrat column. This is a state that could really go either way. Kamala leads in the aggregate by about 2 points, although polls in Michigan do tend to overestimate Democrats. There was a poll from Insider Advantage that had Trump up by 1. That is interesting to me because they were pretty accurate in the 2020, not 2020, not 2022. Excuse me. There's not Insider Advantage. There was a Trump plus 1 poll from Epic MRA way back in August that had Trump up by 1, and they were very accurate in 2022. In 2022 in Michigan, most polls had Gretchen Whitmer, the incumbent Democrat, leading Tudor Dixon by a very small margin. Epic MRA had Whitmer up by about 11. She ended up winning by about 11. So they were spot on in 2022, and they have Trump up by 1. They were an outlier in 2022. They're an outlier in 2024. Does that mean Trump is going to win Michigan? No, but I do think it's going to be very close. I think Trump does better in the like white working class areas near like Saginaw and Flint, but I think Kamala does very well in Grand Rapids. I think it's going to be very close either way, but Michigan is much bluer than Pennsylvania and Wisconsin. A lot of the other swing states, I think Kamala wins it very narrowly. Going up to Wisconsin, I think that tilts Republican. Polls in Wisconsin have always been terrible. There is a lot of voters in the rural parts of the state that pollsters just cannot reach, and they vote overwhelmingly for Donald Trump. If you look at where Trump is polling right now versus how Ron Johnson was polling in the Senate race in 2022, it's pretty close actually, especially with in the Senate race as well. And like I said, polling in Wisconsin almost always overestimates Democrats by sizable margins. I mean, in 2020, it was almost a 6-point miss. In 2016, it was about a 5-point miss, and Kamala Harris leads by just 1. And most of these polls have Kamala Harris up by just 1 point. A 1-point polling miss in Wisconsin, and Trump wins the state, when the state is known for huge polling misses in favor of Republicans. Not to mention that the WOW counties, the suburbs of Milwaukee, these are areas Democrats really think they're going to do well in compared to past years and keep the state blue. If you look at 2022, Tim Michels was a pretty poor fit for the state of Wisconsin. He did not do very well in the election. He really didn't even lose that much ground in that part of the state. I think Trump holds his own, maybe does a few points worse, but I think he makes big gains in the western part of the state and even the northern part of the state. I think he wins Wisconsin very narrowly. Nebraska's 2nd district, Democrats are just pouring money into here. I think Kamala Harris wins it by a lean margin. Not a whole lot to say here. This district is basically just the city of Omaha and some suburbs. I think it goes to Kamala Harris narrowly. Arizona. Arizona is a state that Trump is also polling fairly well in. He leads by about 2 points in the aggregate. Polling in Arizona is sort of all over the place. In 2016, it was pretty accurate. In 2020, it was relatively accurate. Biden still won, but it was by much less than 3 points. I think that Trump narrowly wins Arizona. I think I'll put it in the tilt. Maybe we'll put it in the tilt in the lean Republican column. I think Trump wins it by about 2 points, basically the exact margin the aggregate has. If you look at polling since Biden dropped out, and even before Biden dropped out, Trump has maintained a pretty solid lead in Arizona, other than a little bit here when Kamala surged a bit. Pretty much every poll besides a couple from like July and early August have Kamala Harris winning. Have Trump winning. There was one poll that had Kamala winning from Fox News, but they overestimated Biden by quite a bit in Arizona and polling in 2022. And really, besides that, Trump has been up big. There was also a poll by New York Times that had Kamala Harris up by 5, but they came out with a new poll like yesterday that now has Trump up by 5. So no matter what you want to say, Trump is definitely polling very well in Arizona. I think that Kamala Harris is also a very poor fit for Arizona. Biden did well in Arizona because he was he was just a very strong fit for the state. Trump was not liked because of COVID issues. The state has a much older population. They did not like that Trump didn't really seem to take COVID seriously, but COVID's no longer an issue. Trump is running a strong campaign attacking Kamala for being too progressive. That's really going to work in a state like Arizona that tends to have more moderate voters. And I think Kamala is just not running a great campaign for Arizona. She's not a good fit. I think Trump wins the state by about 2. Nevada, this is an interesting state. Polling has the state very close. Kamala Harris leads the aggregate by about 0.4, so it's razor thin. But this is also a state that tends to overestimate Republicans, actually. So Democrats usually do better in Nevada than polling suggests. So I really don't know what to make of this. Kamala seems to have a very narrow lead in Nevada. I think Trump is going to do better with Hispanics and in Clark County, which is home to Las Vegas, but I think he loses ground in Reno. I think those two things kind of cancel out, and I actually think Kamala Harris very narrowly holds on to Nevada by the skin of her teeth, probably by a couple thousand, maybe even a couple hundred votes. I would not be surprised at all if Trump does flip Nevada. Just right now, and based on past polling misses, I think that Kamala is probably slightly favored. And yeah, so this is the 2024 election prediction as of today. It's a little bit cursed. It's probably going to change a lot before we have the final prediction. Hopefully, I'll be back with a few more videos before the election, kind of covering and giving my thoughts. I think Trump, as of now, is the very narrow favorite. Although, like I said, a lot of these states you could switch around and Trump would lose. I think that, although, like I said, I do think Trump is the favorite, but this election is going to be razor thin. Anyone who is saying that either candidate is going to win in a landslide is just straight up lying to you. This is going to be very close. So get out and vote, no matter who. Get out and vote, and hopefully we will see you with a new video very soon. Thank you for watching, and be sure to like and subscribe if you are new.